You find it on a Tuesday night, scrolling through the listings the way you do every few weeks, half hoping something decent has appeared in your price range, half knowing it probably hasn't. But there it is. Built in 1985, needs some work. The kitchen is dated. The roof has maybe 3 good years left on it. The photos have that particular quality that suggests the seller's agent is doing their best with a difficult subject. But the bones are good and the neighborhood is right, and the price, while uncomfortable, is technically within reach if you stretch. You call your realtor Wednesday morning. You talk through the numbers. You decide to go in competitive. Over-asking, quick close, escalation clause. The full arsenal of things you've learned to do in a market that has been brutal to you for the last 2 years. You put together the best offer you can build. The realtor calls back Thursday afternoon. "Sorry, it went last night. All cash. 50,000 over asking. No inspection contingency, no appraisal contingency, closed in 7 days." You sit with that for a moment. Another one. Another house you can't have. Not because your finances aren't in order. Not because you didn't move fast enough. Not because you did anything wrong. You feel like you failed. Like the market is trying to tell you something about yourself. Here's what I need you to understand. You didn't lose to another family. You didn't lose to a couple who saved harder or made more money or wanted it more than you did. You lost to an LLC, and the LLC had $1 billion behind it and bought 6 other houses that same week. You've heard the explanation. The media version, the think piece version. The version your uncle brings up at Thanksgiving, with a confidence that suggests he has not looked at actual housing data recently. Young people can't afford houses because they spend too much. The avocado toast, the coffee, the streaming subscriptions, and the DoorDash, and the general financial irresponsibility of a generation that wants everything handed to them without doing the work. That explanation is not just wrong. It is a deliberate misdirection. It is the story that gets told when the people responsible for the actual story would prefer you look somewhere else. The math on housing affordability has broken in ways that no amount of canceled subscriptions can fix. In 1980, the median home price was roughly 2.5 times the median annual household income. Today, in most major markets, that ratio is 6, 7, 8 times median income. And in cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, it is significantly higher than that. Wages did not keep pace. They didn't come close. The gap between what homes cost and what normal people earn has been widening for decades, and it did not happen by accident. We are going to talk about how it happened, who made decisions that produced this outcome, who benefited from those decisions, and what the honest picture of the housing market looks like when you remove the narrative about avocado toast and actually follow the money. Because the ladder didn't disappear, it got pulled up. And the people who pulled it up would very much prefer you blame yourself for not jumping higher. To understand what the housing market is today, you have to understand what happened in 2008 and the years immediately following. Because that crash didn't just devastate ordinary homeowners. It created the single greatest wealth transfer opportunity in modern American history. And the people positioned to take advantage of it were not ordinary homeowners. When the subprime mortgage crisis collapsed the housing market, prices dropped dramatically across the country. In some markets, homes lost 30, 40, 50% of their value within a few years. Foreclosures flooded the market. Families who had lost their jobs, lost their adjustable rate mortgages, lost everything they'd put into their homes. They were forced to sell or simply walked away. The inventory was enormous. The prices were historically low. And private equity firms, hedge funds, and institutional investors, sitting on significant capital, with access to cheap borrowing that the Federal Reserve had made available to stabilize the financial system, started buying, not one house at a time. Not in the way a landlord buys a rental property because they want a second income. Systematically, at scale. Algorithmically, in some cases, with software that identified undervalued properties in recovering markets and submitted offers before a human being had finished reading the listing. Blackstone became one of the most discussed examples, spending billions acquiring single-family homes across the country through a subsidiary called Invitation Homes, which eventually went public and became a publicly traded company, whose product is the house you're trying to buy, and the rent you're paying to live in it. They were not alone. American Homes for Rent, Progress, Residential, Tricon. A roster of institutional landlords that most Americans had never heard of began accumulating the housing stock that previous generations had used to build middle-class wealth. Now, think about what you're actually up against when you make an offer on that 1985 ranch house with the dated kitchen. You have a pre-approval letter from your bank. You have a down payment you've been saving for 4 years. You have a mortgage contingency because your lender requires it, and an inspection contingency because you are a rational person who does not want to buy a structural problem. Your offer takes 30 days to close, minimum, because that's how mortgage underwriting works. The institutional buyer has none of those constraints. They have cash. They close in a week. They waive every contingency because they've bought enough houses to self-insure against any individual property's problems. They have seen the inside of the house on a video walkthrough conducted by a local contractor they have on retainer. They do not need to fall in love with it. They need it to pencil out on a spreadsheet. You are a person trying to buy a home to live in. They are a business optimizing a portfolio of income-generating assets. You showed up to a boxing match and the other person brought a tank. And the referee, which is to say, the regulatory environment that was supposed to prevent this kind of market concentration, largely watched it happen. This is not a free market. A free market requires participants who are competing on roughly equivalent terms. What we have is a market where billion-dollar entities with preferential access to capital are competing directly against individual families for the same finite inventory. The outcome of that competition was never in serious doubt. Let's talk about what Wall Street actually wants with all these houses, because it's not what you might assume. This isn't a flip strategy. Buy low, renovate, sell high, move on. That's too small, too transactional. The model these institutional buyers are running is considerably more ambitious and considerably more permanent. They want to own the houses forever, and they want you to pay them rent for the rest of your life to live in one. Think about what happened to software in the last 20 years. You used to buy Microsoft Office once, paid your $200, installed the disk, owned the thing. Then the industry figured out that selling you something once is an inferior business model compared to charging you every month indefinitely. So Adobe became a subscription. Microsoft Office became a subscription. Your antivirus, your creative tools, your productivity software, all subscriptions. The product didn't change. The ownership structure changed. You went from owning the thing to renting access to it forever, and the company went from one-time revenue to permanent monthly cash flow. Wall Street looked at single-family housing and saw the same opportunity at a scale that makes software look modest. A house, owned outright by an institutional investor and rented to a family, generates monthly cash flow indefinitely. The tenant pays rent. The rent covers the mortgage the institution took out to buy the property, often at institutional borrowing rates significantly lower than what you'd qualify for, covers the maintenance, and produces a margin. Meanwhile, the property appreciates. The equity accumulates for the investor. The tax advantages of real estate ownership flow to the investor, and the family living in the house builds exactly nothing. No equity, no ownership stake, no asset to pass to their children, while funding the investor's balance sheet every single month. What used to be the primary mechanism for middle-class wealth accumulation, buying a modest home, paying it off over 30 years, passing it to the next generation, or using the equity to fund retirement, is being systematically converted into a revenue stream for hedge fund shareholders. The wealth that previous generations built through home ownership doesn't disappear. It redirects up, away from the families who would have accumulated it, and toward the institutional investors who now hold the asset instead. We are watching the construction of a permanent renter class in real time. Not because people lack the desire to own, not because they've made poor financial decisions, but because the asset class they need to access is being consolidated by entities with resources they cannot compete against, who have every financial incentive to keep them renting and no incentive to ever sell. The subscription economy came for your software first, then your music, your movies, your television. Now it's coming for your shelter. And unlike Netflix, you cannot cancel. At this point, a reasonable question occurs to most people who have been watching the housing market for the last couple of years. If mortgage rates are at 7%, the highest they've been in decades, shouldn't that be cooling prices? Shouldn't higher borrowing costs mean lower home values, the way basic supply and demand economics suggests? It should. In the old version of the housing market, it would have. But the old version of the housing market had a feature that the current one is missing, and its absence changes everything. Sellers. Specifically, the millions of homeowners who locked in mortgage rates between 2 and 3% during 2020 and 2021, when the Federal Reserve pushed rates to historic lows and refinancing became the rational thing to do. These homeowners, and there are tens of millions of them across the country, are sitting on mortgages that are simply not available anymore. 2.8%, 3.1%. Rates that in the current environment look less like a financial product and more like a winning lottery ticket. Here is their situation. They own a house. They might want to move, job change, growing family, different city, just ready for something different. In a normal market, they'd list the house, sell it, take the proceeds, and buy something new. But buying something new means financing something new at 7%, which means the monthly payment on a comparable property, same square footage, same general quality, same kind of neighborhood, would be roughly double what they're currently paying. Not slightly higher, not meaningfully higher, double. So they run the math, and the math says stay. Even if the house no longer fits perfectly, even if the commute is wrong or the school district changed or they've simply outgrown the space. The financial penalty for leaving is so severe that leaving becomes irrational for a huge portion of potential sellers. They are trapped in their own homes by a mortgage rate that is simultaneously the best financial decision they ever made and the thing preventing them from making any subsequent decision at all. Golden handcuffs, but on the house instead of the job. The result of that paralysis, millions of would-be sellers frozen in place by the math of moving, is an inventory crisis that makes the Wall Street acquisition problem dramatically worse. When normal homeowners don't sell, the number of houses available on the market drops toward historic lows. Supply collapses. And into that collapsed supply, institutional buyers are still operating, still submitting all cash offers on whatever does get listed, still acquiring properties that would otherwise have gone to first-time buyers, still removing inventory from the ownership market and adding it to the rental market permanently. You have high rates suppressing new buyers. You have rate lock paralysis suppressing sellers. You have institutional capital absorbing whatever thin inventory exists. The three forces combine into a housing market that is simultaneously unaffordable to buy into and nearly impossible to find inventory in. Prices stay brutally high, not because the underlying demand from normal buyers is strong enough to support them. 7% rates have absolutely damaged affordability for regular families, but because the supply is so constrained that even weakened demand has nowhere to go. It is a gridlock that benefits exactly one group of participants: the ones who already own the assets and are collecting rent, while everyone else waits for a market that keeps refusing to normalize. The most common response I hear when people learn about institutional buying and rate lock paralysis and the full picture of how broken the housing market currently is some version of this. Fine, I'll just wait for the crash. I understand the impulse. 2008 happened. Prices dropped dramatically. People who had cash and patience and a tolerance for catching a falling knife bought houses at prices that look extraordinary in retrospect. If it happened once, it can happen again. Just wait it out, keep saving, and be ready when the market corrects. I am going to explain, as clearly as I can, why that strategy is likely to fail you, and why the train you're waiting for is not on the schedule. The 2008 crash was a specific kind of crisis, a credit crisis. The collapse was driven by the fact that millions of mortgages had been issued to borrowers who could not actually afford them. Adjustable rate products that reset to payments the borrowers couldn't sustain. Underwriting standards that had been systematically abandoned in the rush to originate and securitize. When those loans reset and the borrowers defaulted, the forced selling flooded the market with inventory. Supply exploded. Prices collapsed. That's the mechanism. None of that mechanism is present today. The homeowners sitting on those 2 and 3% mortgages are not subprime borrowers waiting to default. They are, by and large, qualified buyers who locked in good rates on properties they can afford at those rates. Their equity positions are strong. Years of appreciation have given them significant cushion. They are not going to be forced to sell. They have every financial incentive to stay exactly where they are, and no financial incentive to list their house into a 7% rate environment. Without forced selling, there is no flood of inventory. Without inventory, there is no crash. There might be softening in certain markets. There might be modest price declines in specific overheated areas. But the 2008 scenario, the broad, dramatic, nationwide collapse that creates generational buying opportunities, requires a trigger that does not currently exist. You are sitting at the station waiting for a train that is not scheduled. The station is comfortable enough, but the train is not coming. And while you wait, the rent goes up and the index fund you're not investing in keeps compounding without you. So, let's talk about what you actually do. Because this video is not a counsel of despair. The game is rigged. That's true, and it's worth being angry about. But being angry and being paralyzed are 2 different things, and one of them is considerably more expensive than the other. If you cannot buy right now, if the math in your market doesn't work, if the down payment isn't there yet, if the available inventory is getting absorbed by institutional buyers before you can compete, then you rent. And the first thing I need you to do is kill the script that makes you feel like a failure for doing so. Renting is not throwing money away. We covered this in the housing video, and I'll say it again here because the cultural shame around renting is one of the most financially damaging belief systems the middle class carries. Rent is the maximum you will pay for housing that month. When the roof leaks, you call the landlord. When the water heater fails at 11 on a Friday night, you call the landlord. When the property taxes go up, that is categorically not your problem. You are purchasing a service, shelter, maintenance included, at a fixed and predictable cost. The secret is what you do with the gap. In most markets right now, renting a property costs meaningfully less than owning a comparable one when you factor in the mortgage at current rates, the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance. The gap between those 2 numbers, what it costs to rent versus what it would cost to own, is real money, every month, and that money has a job. It goes into the market. Specifically, a low-cost total market or S&P 500 index fund, automated, consistent, boring, and entirely inaccessible to the institutional buyers who outbid you on the house. They cannot submit an all-cash offer on your index fund. They cannot waive contingencies and close in a week on your brokerage account. The stock market is the one appreciating asset class where your money competes on exactly equal terms with the billion-dollar funds. If renting saves you $1,500 a month compared to owning in your market, and you invest that $1,500 every month into an index fund for 15 years, the compounding math produces a number that should genuinely reframe how you think about the rent versus buy question. You are not losing the wealth-building game because you rent. You are playing it on different terrain where the rules are actually fair. Increase your income where you can. Keep your expenses honest. Invest the gap aggressively and automatically. Build the down payment in parallel if homeownership is still the goal. And stop apologizing for not owning a home in a market that was deliberately made inaccessible to you. The failure is not yours. The rigging is real. And the appropriate response to a rigged game is not self-blame. It is finding the table where the game is fair and sitting down there instead. Here's the summary. The housing market did not become unaffordable because your generation drinks too much coffee or lacks the discipline that previous generations had. It became unaffordable because institutional capital entered the single-family home market at scale, because rate lock paralysis eliminated the inventory that would normally create opportunities, and because the regulatory environment that might have intervened largely did not. That is the honest picture. It is maddening. It should be maddening, and you are allowed to be angry about it. But anger without a plan is just expensive. The plan is to rent without shame, invest the gap without hesitation, and build wealth in the places where the game hasn't been rigged against you yet. They can outbid you on the house. They cannot outbid you on the index fund. If this video helped you realize that you are not a failure for not owning a home, that the math was broken before you arrived at the table, hit the like button before you go. There are people staring at Zillow right now at midnight, feeling like they've done something wrong, and this video needs to reach them. You didn't do anything wrong. The table was tilted. Now you know which table to sit at instead. If you're not subscribed yet, this is the channel. No real estate agents with affiliate deals. No mortgage brokers with referral fees. Just the honest version of what's happening and what to do about it. Take care of yourselves. Build wealth where they can't stop you. I'll see you in the next one.